Okay. Hopefully those IT issues are being resolved and that you can hear and or see me. I know that this is a bit of a new platform for most of us, a new interface, so hopefully those issues will be resolved. I'll get started. And today's lecture, as you know, is on the structure of the art market, or the structure of the art world. The way that this is going to work is I'm going to be going through the slides and a Q&A where you can pose questions, and I'll answer those to the best of my ability. So let's get started. The structure of the art world, what do I mean by that? Well, what I'm going to be discussing today is the actors, organizations, and institutions that comprise the art world, so both commercial and non-commercial players. I'm going to be moving to the next slide, so hopefully you can see this. What do I mean by actors, institutions, organizations? Well, I'm talking about the entities, most of which you should be familiar with, or most of which many of you will be familiar with, that are on the screen here. So from collectors to auction houses, art fairs, dealers, museums, critics, regular exhibitions such as biennials and triennials, and artists. And this graphic, I hope, represents just how interconnected and interdependent all of these entities are, and how they work together to promote a certain core group of artists. And we'll be going through kind of each of these actors individually during this presentation. First, we'll be looking at the commercial players. Now, I see some of you are having trouble seeing or hearing me. I hope that some of you can see and hear me. I'm going to continue, but I hope that the majority of you are able to either see the video or hear the audio that accompanies the slide. In any event, so first I'm going to be talking about the commercial players. And the major commercial players, of course, are the auction houses and the commercial galleries. And in fact, the market divide between dealers and auction houses has wavered around 50-50 for about the past decade. So what does that mean? It means that the market share is roughly evenly split. So to give an example, in 2010, aggregate sales of art and antiques around the world amounted to approximately 43 billion euros. 21 billion was sold at auction, and approximately 22 billion through dealers. And, you know, these figures have wavered, but roughly 50-50 for the time being and for about the past 10 years. Now, I want to talk a little bit about auction houses because I think there have been some very interesting developments in regards to auction houses, particularly in the last 5 or so years. And I think this is quite important when we discuss not only how the market has developed, but also potential future directions the market might take. Most of you will be familiar with the two main auction houses internationally, Christie's and Sotheby's. Both of these were founded in the UK in the 18th century, so they've been around for 200 years and have had approximately 200 years to come to dominate the market. Both of these auction houses garnered over 4 billion euros in 2012. So by far, this duopoly is way ahead of any competitor. Now you'll see I've divided this slide into international auction houses and Chinese auction houses. And this is something I also want to discuss, is the rise of Chinese auction houses as development, both in terms of auction houses and for the international art market as a whole. But first off, looking at the left-hand side, we have Christie's and Sotheby's, and then below Christie's and Sotheby's, we have Phillips, which was formerly Phillips de Pury, and you can see significantly less revenue, so 259 million euros in 2012. And also with auction houses with an international presence are Bonhams, the UK-based auction house Bonhams, and our based in France. So you can see here that Christie's and Sotheby's by far is in the lead, and these other auction houses, although they do have an international presence, are significantly smaller in terms of revenue and also in terms of size. And then below that are, of course, the local, regional, and specialist auction houses. Specialist auction houses, if you think of McDougall, which is based in London, which specializes in Russian art, or local auction houses, some of which have become particularly prominent as of late because of their online presence. And certainly the fact that now many auctions are held online has opened up activity at some of the smaller auction houses. So now, say, a Chinese bidder might bid on a vase of Chinese origin at a local auction house in the UK and might look at catalogs online as well. And certainly the internet has facilitated an opening up and an expansion of the auction market as a whole. Now I want to talk a little bit about Chinese auction houses, which I think is a very, very interesting subject. We talked about internationally how the art trade as a whole is roughly split evenly between auction houses and dealers. This is not true in China. And in fact, in China, the auction houses dominate and have a disproportionate share of the market relative to auction houses elsewhere. Interestingly, there are two main auction houses that are sort of at the head of the field, Poly or Baoli and Guardian. Here you'll see on this slide that Poly had about 732 million euros in revenue in 2012, Guardian 625, far ahead of an auction house like Phillips, although significantly behind Christie's and Sotheby's. However, this is half the revenue that both of those auction houses earned in 2011. So you saw their revenues diminish by half. And this is something that we may return to in future lectures because I think it's a very interesting issue. But still, they have very, very significant and growing influence in the international art market. Both Poly and Guardian are in periods of expansion, so opening offices. Not only they're both based in Beijing in mainland China, expanding into Hong Kong, but also opening offices in New York. And another interesting thing about these two auction houses is just how new they are. So we talked about Christie's and Sotheby's being founded in the 18th century, 200 years to develop and become prominent. Baoli was only founded in 2005. So this is absolutely remarkable and breakneck speed in terms of development. Guardian was founded in the mid-90s. So relative to Christie's and Sotheby's, this is really startling development and very, very recent. Below Poly and Guardian, there are many, many Chinese auction houses that also are, in terms of comparison with international auction houses, yielding significant revenue. So Hanhai, Council, Xiaode, Xinlin, Ningshi, and Highest Auctions all have revenues over 100 million euros. And most of these are unknown in the West, even though they do have a presence in mainland China. So now I want to talk. This slide, just to reiterate what I was saying, it shows the rise of the domestic mainland Chinese auction houses. So you can see as far as auction sales volume goes from 2000 to 2009, you can see the growing influence of the domestic auction houses, led, of course, by Poly and Guardian. So I will also talk about some other recent developments. In addition to the rise of China, we've also been seeing auction houses in general gaining relative market power over the past 20 years or so. Until the 60s, pretty much, auctions were really a wholesale bet. Whereas, sorry, I can see your comments about. I'm going to continue to try speaking. Please let me know if you can or cannot hear me. Okay. Hello. Okay. Okay. So I muted myself and I left the video conference, and I'll try rejoining. Was it okay at any point, or was this? Okay. Let me try rejoining and seeing if it's better. Is that, should I try rejoining, or? Okay. 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 Hi, everyone. I hope this is better, possibly. Okay. Sorry, we're still, I think, smoothing out some of these issues. I hope as we continue, it's all right. And if not, okay. So do you think I should turn off the video then? Okay. All right. So let's continue. Talking about recent developments with auction houses. Did everyone miss what I was talking about with auction houses before? Okay. I'll go back one slide then and just give a brief summary about what I was saying. So I was talking about auction houses and comparing international auction houses, Christie's and Sotheby's obviously being the dominant auction houses in the field, both of which have over 4 billion euros in revenue in 2012, and comparing those to other international auction houses such as Phillips, formerly Phillips de Pury, Bonhams, also UK-based, and Art Curial, which is based in France, and comparing that to the rise of Chinese auction houses. And I'm sorry if I'm reiterating myself. I know there's been some static issues, and for those of you, if you could hear me, I apologize. But I'll just go through this very quickly. One very interesting development over the past few years has been the rise of Chinese auction houses based in mainland China, although recently they've opened up offices in Hong Kong and even in New York. And for instance, at the head of the field is Poly or Bao Li and Guardian. Poly was only founded in 2005, so this is a really amazing and very, very rapid development. Guardian was founded in the mid-90s. Both of those sort of lead the field. And then below them are auction houses like Hanhai, Council, Jiuge, Xinlin, Yinshe, and Highest Auctions, which all have revenues over 100 million euros. So you can see that Chinese auction houses have very, very quickly become very influential and powerful in terms of their sales volume and as far as revenue. Also worth noting, though, that these auction houses, and I'll go to the next slide now, we've really seen remarkable development, particularly in the last few years. And as I note on the previous slide here, even though the revenue over 700 and over 600 million euros when it comes to Poly and Guardian is extremely high, that's half of the revenue in 2011. So revenue was twice as large in 2011, and due to a number of reasons, some of which I think we'll be discussing in future lectures, that there is some instability in the market, although I think very recently confidence has been on the rise. Okay, so I want to continue on from this discussion and talk a little bit about some of the recent developments with the auction house field as a whole. One is the transition from the auction house as wholesaler to effective retailer. So what does this mean? Well, until about the 1960s, auctions were really events that were mainly for dealers. So in order to get stock, dealers would attend auctions. They would be daytime events, relatively informal. And the person who really revolutionized the auction as an event was Peter Wilson of Sotheby's, who in the 1960s transformed auctions from wholesale events meant for industry insiders, meant for dealers, into these glamorous gala evening events where they invited celebrities, they tried to attract as much publicity as possible, and the sort of ebullient 1960s where suddenly there were a number of record-breaking prices added to the sort of buzz around auction sales. And in the past 20 years, this has become even more the case, where auctions have continued to attract incredible amounts of publicity, and auction houses themselves have become increasingly powerful. Now you see auction houses not only rivaling dealers for clients and stock, but in some cases, they've even acquired dealerships. So to give two examples, one is Honcha Venison, which was a contemporary art gallery with branches in London, Zurich, and Berlin. And that was bought by Christie's in 2007. So effectively, Christie's had its own retail space at which they could access clients and even participate in art fairs. This was combined with Christie's private sales in 2013. Another example is Nortman Master Painting. So a different field of art. This is not contemporary art, but Old Master and Impressionist paintings that was acquired by Sotheby's in 2006 and also gave Sotheby's access to art fairs such as the European Fine Art Fair in Maastricht. So obviously, dealers weren't so happy with these developments, as auction houses were basically encroaching on what historically has been their territory. So whereas auction houses were meant to stick to the secondary market, which is basically art that an individual has already acquired that they're looking to sell on, and galleries traditionally have focused more on the primary market, nurturing the career of artists, finding artists, identifying artists, nurturing their careers, helping them develop their careers. The lines between the two have become very much blurred. And now auction houses are expanding into the primary market, both by acquiring dealerships, like I said, for instance, acquiring Honcha Venison or Nortman in recent years, but also, in some cases, selling work directly from artists. And the most notorious example of this is the 2008 Damien Hirst sale at Sotheby's. This is an image from the sale, or rather from the sort of publicity campaign prior to the sale. You can see here Damien Hirst in front of one of his iconic formaldehyde. In this case, it's a zebra in formaldehyde in the formaldehyde tank, and you can see just the scale of the press that had gathered at Sotheby's to document this event. And this event has become especially notorious because the sale was held on the day that Lehman's collapsed, and really the work, not only did the sale do amazingly well, but essentially it was sort of the very, very peak of the market right before things really took a downturn. And what was particularly interesting about this event as well is that Damien Hirst was dealing directly with Sotheby's, foregoing any kind of middleman. So his dealers, people like Larry Gagosian or Jay Jopling, got no cut from the sale. In fact, they were bidders at the sale because their own stock would decline in value if works sold for less than what they had hoped for, or if works went unsold. So the sold rate was remarkably high, I think something like 96%. Very few works were bought in, meaning that very few works did not sell. And this was an enormous success, both for Damien Hirst and for Sotheby's, in terms of cross-branding and for setting a precedent for artists dealing directly with an auction house, as opposed to feeling like they had to go through their dealers, either in terms of access to collectors or in terms of loyalty. This was a dangerous precedent from the perspective of his dealers. So in terms of the gallery world, there are now approximately 400,000 listed dealers of fine and decorative arts and antiques in the major global art markets. But it's interesting to note that the top 2 to 5% of dealers account for well over half the volume of sales. Now, one of the readings that I suggested for this lecture is an article that appeared in New York Magazine about Larry Gagosian. Larry Gagosian is the most famous and arguably the most influential and powerful art dealer in the world. And, you know, the rise of the mega gallery is a very important development to note too. So for instance, Larry Gagosian, not only does he have multiple galleries in New York and multiple galleries in London, multiple galleries in Los Angeles, he also has galleries in Paris, Rome, Athens, Geneva, Hong Kong, and so on. So an incredibly international presence, in addition to selling some of the most famous contemporary artists and managing some of the most famous post-war artists' estates. So in terms of revenue, I think it's been estimated that he sells over $1 billion worth of art each year. Other galleries that have also expanded internationally include Hauser and Wirth, Pace Gallery, which has galleries in New York, London, Beijing, White Cube now expanding both in London and in Hong Kong, and so on and so forth. So you have a whereas according to this poll of dealers, 45% of dealer sales are made through galleries. In a specific city and towards these non-traditional ways of selling art, such as art fairs or through online sales. It's been shown that as a result of that, some galleries have chosen to abandon the retail space entirely and to move their galleries into a virtual presence online, or basically to only participate in art fairs, and that is their way of connecting with collectors and their retail space in order to make contact with collectors. Now there are these alternatives. And, there's a lot of money to be made. And not only are the booth fees, so the fees for renting the shipping, insurance, hotels, staff, etc. The other expenses can basically match the cost of the fees. So for most art fairs, you're talking about considerable sums of money, definitely in the tens of which is a relatively, it's not the most, certainly not the most expensive fair, nor is it the most prominent fair, but the minimum for the smallest stand in the fair would total about 13,000 euros. That's excluding, the cost of shipping, insurance, contemporary art. It's the most prominent and prestigious. It's also overwhelmingly Eurocentric. And okay, I'm going to pause and reconnect. Okay, I've reconnected. I hope the sound is somewhat better. No. Okay. Hello. No, I haven't changed anything. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to try this again. How is the sound? Is it any better? Is it better for everyone? Okay, great. Okay, I'll continue then. And please just let me know if the sound is failing, and I'll try reconnecting. I'm not quite sure what's going on because I'm not changing any of the settings. In any event, talking about Art Basel. So Art Basel is one of the world's most exclusive fairs. There's about 1,000 or so applicants each year, of which 300 are admitted. And this past year's fair, so we're talking about in June 2012, featured about $2 billion worth of art, so quite a considerable amount, and reflects the fact that this is a fair which features primarily blue chip, modern, and contemporary art. So the sort of most established, tested, seasoned, art historically validated type of art. And in fact, economic instability in the Eurozone and worldwide has helped the fair, which represents the very top of the market because art often tends to be a place where people want to park their money when faced with things like currency devaluation or currency instability, or when other forms of investment are seemingly unstable or less reliable. So Art Basel has definitely been a beneficiary of this trend, and you can see where Basel is located here. If you look on the map, you'll see it's very strategically located between France, Germany, and Switzerland, right on the border of those three countries, and also in close proximity to other European countries like Austria and Italy. Art Basel has become like these mega galleries that have proliferated and now have branches around the world. Branches around the world. 2002, which has become one of the most important art fairs in the United States, and actually has become also quite an interesting event in terms of the increased participation of stake in the fair, and now has rebranded the fair as Art Basel Hong Kong. So it'll be very interesting to see how that affects the development of this fair, which has already become the most important fair in Asia, and whether this affects the quality and also the types of galleries that participate. Another prominent fair is Frieze, which is London's top contemporary art fair, but as of 2012 has expanded. So not only has it launched Frieze Masters, which is held at the same time as the Frieze Contemporary Fair in London, and focuses on art that was made before 2000, from antiquities to 20th century art and decorative art. It has also launched an event in 2012 in New York. And in fact, for those of you who are in New York or who might be in New York, their next event will be held very soon from May 10th to 13th in Randall's Island Park. And this, of course, has represented a challenge to New York's Armory Show, which many agree has been somewhat flagging in recent years. This image on the top left shows what the interior of Frieze looks like in London, and quite similar in New York, an enormous tent divided into gallery-specific booths, and you get a sense of the scale here. And about 500 galleries apply to participate in Frieze each year, about 170 exhibit, so it's slightly less exclusive than Basel, where 1,000 galleries apply and about 300 exhibit. Now I want to talk about a little bit of a different example, TEFF, or the European Fine Art Fair in Maastricht, which some would say is the most sort of moneyed and exclusive art fair in the world, focusing mostly on, similar to Frieze Masters, work prior to 2000, one could say. There certainly are contemporary galleries that participate, but most of the galleries focus on art from earlier periods. It's a very diverse fair. But it's also known for, like I said, being quite an exclusive event. In 2010, 171 private aircraft arrived at the local Maastricht airport during the course of the fair, so you get a sense of just how popular it is with a certain class of people, I suppose. It's also the most expensive fair to attend, so about 55 euros per person. And in terms of the value of the art sold, it's also the most expensive, so about $5.2 billion worth of museum-quality work was sold at the 2013 edition of the fair, which was held very recently, just last month in March. And the highlights of that fair included a $14 million Velázquez and a $25 million painting by Modigliani. So you get a sense of the caliber of work. It prides itself on showing only museum-quality work, and as a result of that, has a vetting process which is very unique for art fairs. So essentially there's a posse of experts that pore over all of the offerings before the opening. And here, let me just move forward. You'll see that you'll see examples of these experts examining the works that are going on show, and about 25% of all items are challenged and do not return to the floor. So don't meet the quality, or there are some authenticity issues, or there are condition issues with the works and they're unable to be displayed and sold at this fair. You can also see that galleries, because this is a fair where it's very exclusive, even the booth decoration tends to be a lot more elaborate than other fairs, which tend to be kind of a bare bones white cube space. Galleries from abroad often spend nearly $100,000 US between the booth, shipping and insurance fees, and even the decoration of the booth can amount to very considerable sums. The rewards, however, can be great, and to just give an example, Norton sold 3 paintings and a drawing for $15 million at the opening day of this year's fair. Another interesting development is the possibility that next year, in 2014, TEFAF may hold an event at Beijing's new Freeport, and this is another indication of the growing importance of China in terms of the international art market. They're in talks with Gehua, which is a Chinese state-owned enterprise, which is responsible for the new Beijing Freeport under construction, and Sotheby's, actually, which is going to also be involved in this Freeport project, about holding an event in Beijing. And certainly TEFAF is an event that's looking very much to emerging markets in order to expand not only their brand, but also their the potential collector base that may frequent their fairs. Now I want to talk about some other new directions in art fairs, and that is online art fairs. One of which is the VIP Art Fair, which is became very well known over the last year or two for offering a completely online art fair. Other online ventures which have also become prominent or have received a lot of publicity include Artsy, which had some very prominent investors, including Dasha Zhukova, Roman Abramovich's girlfriend, Wendy Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch's wife, a number of other venture capitalists getting involved. And it's based on Pandora-like technology to help collectors find art based on their preferences. And another is Paddle8, which is another e-commerce site that curates exhibitions and organizes sales. So certainly this is part of a much broader trend, which is the role the internet is playing in the art market and how it may be changing the way sales are conducted. Now I want to talk about some non-commercial players. Now, one of the most important non-commercial players, of course, is the museum, which plays an incredibly important role in legitimizing and validating art, particularly contemporary art. So this is a kind of pyramid or hierarchy of museums. Now, of course, not all museums are created equal in terms of the influence that they have on the market. A museum like the Museum of Modern Art in New York has a profound influence on the market. So, for instance, if an artist has a retrospective or a solo show at MoMA, often you'll see a very direct impact in sales figures at auction. So, for instance, an artist gets kind of a boost by showing at certain museums, like particularly the Museum of Modern Art in New York, or Tate Modern, or the Centre Pompidou, or the Guggenheim. And even smaller museums can be very, very important in terms of validation and giving collectors confidence in acquiring certain artists' work. And the museum, of course, plays a very, very important role in terms of offering art historical, academic, curatorial validation. Now, another aspect of the market that contributes to the validation or legitimization of art are art critics. And these are just some examples of some of the prominent art magazines, kind of an international selection. So Frieze, which is based in London, the Italian magazine Flash Art, Art Forum based in New York, Art in America also based in New York. And these are good sources if you want to familiarize yourself with what's going on in the contemporary art market, and particularly artists that might be up and coming or shows that are particularly noteworthy. Also, newspaper critics can play an important role, and here I've just identified a few prominent critics from The Guardian, The New York Times, New York Magazine, etc. So definitely worth keeping an eye on in order to familiarize yourself with the sort of contemporary art landscape. Now, the art critic, one could argue, and I would suggest, was a much more powerful figure until very recently. Tom Wolfe, the famous journalist, wrote a book called The Painted Word, and in this book he asserted that modern art had moved away from being a visual experience and was more often an illustration of art critics' theories. And in particular, he pointed to three prominent art critics, Clement Greenberg, Harold Rosenberg, and Leo Steinberg. The three played a very important role in the post-war period, particularly Clement Greenberg. He was responsible for promoting particularly abstract expressionist painting that he valued based on its formal properties. And he gained notoriety and fame by being a very, very early advocate of people like Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Mark Rothko, Franz Kline. So these artists that were associated with American abstract expressionism. However, Clement Greenberg was also known for his conflicting interests and certainly wielded influence in the art market and perhaps didn't quite police sort of his commercial and non-commercial activities as much as he should have. In any event, recent years has seen the so-called death of the critic, and this may also relate to the decline of print media, where people are just simply reading these art magazines and art reviews in newspapers less and less. And instead, we've seen the rise of the critic curator, which many people say now fills the place once occupied by the art critic. So people like Hans-Ulrich Obrist, Daniel Birnbaum, Nicholas Borio, these critic curators that often participate in prominent biennial or triennial exhibitions, who are affiliated with important nonprofit institutions, and whose curatorial vision often has a major impact on the market. Now there's also other forms of validation or legitimization, and these include art prizes. So, for instance, the Turner Prize, which is awarded by Tate Britain, or the Tate more generally, created in 1984 to celebrate contemporary art and is awarded each year to a British artist under 50, often quite controversially. The Hugo Bross Prize, which is given every other year to an artist working in any medium, anywhere, and includes a prize of $100,000. There's also been other new prizes, including the collector Victor Pigchuk now has an art prize, which also carries $100,000 award. So a number of art prizes which can really further an artist's career. These are images from the Turner Prize, and you can see how the Turner Prize in particular capitalizes on the sort of celebrity culture that now has been very much tied into the art world. So every year they usually get a celebrity presenter. Recent years have included people like Madonna, or here you see a photo of Lucia Prada, the fashion designer, who's also a very important collector of contemporary art. Now, another aspect of the international art world are these regular exhibitions that are held all over the world. Biennials or triennials, often called biennales, the Italian term, and they've really proliferated globally since 1989. Now there are similar exhibition events held everywhere from Havana to Guangzhou in China. You have events, from South America to Asia to Africa to Okay. Please let me know if it sounds any better. No. Okay. Let me try disconnecting and reconnecting again. Hello? Can everyone hear me? Is this a bit better? Great. I'm not quite sure why it's regularly disconnecting, but I think you're right. There does seem to be some kind of pattern. I hope that this will at least last for the duration of this lecture. Sorry for the interruption and sorry for any inconvenience. Okay, so we're talking about biennials and triennials, these events, exhibition events which have proliferated globally since 1989. So everywhere from Havana to Dakar to Guangzhou, you see these regular exhibition events which are usually held for a set period of time, usually anywhere from a month to 3 months in duration. The Venice Biennale, of course, is the oldest and most prestigious, founded in the 19th century. Another very, very important event is Documenta, which takes place every 5 years, so has become a kind of bellwether of what's happening in the contemporary art world. It was held last year, so the next event is in 2017. Sao Paulo is the second oldest biennial event, but there have been some issues in recent years. And the Whitney Biennial is another example of a very influential biennial exhibition, particularly in the US context. So this is just to show you, to give you a sense of just how widespread these events now are. This shows actually both art fairs and biennials, both of which have expanded enormously since the 1990s. And here you see everywhere from Japan, even Mongolia, India, Singapore, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, all these places now have regular art events devoted to contemporary art. Now, the Venice Biennale is, like I said, the oldest and most prestigious of these events, and they've retained their sort of 19th century structure, which is a kind of World's Fair of art, and they continue to show contemporary art in nationally themed pavilions. So founded in 1895, the biennial was originally a selling event, which was only dismantled in 1968, and this is actually quite an interesting thing. You see at least the perception of commercial and non-commercial events being totally separate, becoming very, very important for the art market. And yet, Venice Biennale was a selling event until fairly recently. However, now commerce is completely taboo, and even though business may be more circumspect, there's some instances of national pavilions where every work was sold prior to the biennial. There is at least the pretense that this is a non-commercial, non-profit, and thus more legitimate event. However, some people say, you know, see it in Venice, buy it in Basel. There still is clearly this commercial component, even if everyone wants to ignore its existence. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Olav Veltus. He wrote an article that appeared in the art newspaper. I think it might be listed as one of the required readings. If not, I'll certainly include the link for those of you who haven't read this piece. But he talks about the 4 paradoxes, specifically in relation to the Venice Biennale and Art Basel. Typically, they're held very, very close to each other. They're in relatively close geographical proximity, and they're also held within usually a week or 2 of each other. This year, I think within 2 weeks of each other, both in June. And he identifies 4 paradoxes about the Venice Biennale. First of all, purity produces market power. So the fact that Venice purports to be a non-selling, non-commercial event actually makes it more influential in terms of the market. The fact that an artist is chosen ostensibly for non-commercial reasons, you know, they're selected usually by a prominent curator in their home country, makes it, in the eyes of many collectors or dealers and so on, more legitimate or more valid. The second paradox is the fresher the signal, the stronger its impact. Until fairly recently, participating in the Venice Biennale would be the sort of crowning achievement of an artist's career. So later in the career, they would be shown at the Venice Biennale, they might win an award, and it would be considered kind of recognition of a life's work. Now this is very different. An artist is typically shown either early in their career or sort of at the midpoint of their career. So their participation in the Biennale is much more influential because it occurs earlier in the artist's career. The third paradox is that independence is financed by dealers' money. And this is quite interesting. Recent years, you might have noticed if you attended the Venice Biennale or read reports or reviews of the art on show, you increasingly see large-scale installations, video work that's not typically the most sellable or considered the most marketable, work that is so-called difficult, new media art that's very large or ephemeral. However, because this work is often very expensive to produce, kind of counterintuitively, these difficult types of art, so new media art, for instance, video art, can be very expensive to produce. Large-scale installation also being very expensive. It means that these pavilions, which are often financed by government money, are more and more reliant on dealers to assist in the funding of the production, the realization, the installation, the execution of this work. And the fourth paradox is visibility because of the proximity to the Biennale. So the Venice Biennale is even more visible because of its proximity both geographically and temporally to Basel. Now, I just want to end by giving you an example. This is Allura and Caldezia, who represented the United States at the last Venice Biennale. And these are images from their Venice presentation. So the first image is outside of the Venice Biennale, this kind of overturned tank. And inside, they had gymnasts interacting with sort of airplane interiors. And then here, you can see work on show at Art Basel only shortly thereafter. So you see the sort of synergy between the two. And I think it's important to end on this note, to remark on the incredible synergy and interdependence of all of these art world actors. Now, this lecture, of course, has been fairly introductory, just talking about the sort of landscape or structure of the art world. But what I do want to emphasize is just how integrated these actors are and how reliant they are on each other. And this is something that I think will become evident as we continue talking about the art world and about different aspects of the art market. Now, I know that there's been some communication difficulties, so I think now is a good time to end, and I'll open it up to any questions anyone might have. Please just chat to me at the bottom left of your screen, and I'll answer any questions you might have. Okay, great. Now I'm scrolling through your comments. Okay, so first question is, to what degree are museums pitted against dealers in the art market? Now, I would say they're not really antagonistic. And in fact, in recent years, I think kind of similar to what I was talking about with Venice, where the more difficult the work is, the more reliant museums, or the more reliant the Biennale comes on dealers. I think dealers now have a very collaborative relationship with museums. You see dealers contributing to the realization of exhibitions, and also in some cases, they're very large donors to museums. So for instance, if any of you are here in London and you go to Tate Modern, you'll see amongst the high-profile donors are a number of very famous dealers. And, you know, whereas maybe in the past, museums wouldn't want anything to do with dealers, now I think you see a much more pragmatic relationship developing. Okay. So let me scroll through. I see some more comments here. You stated there's been a proliferation of biennials, triennials post-1989. What happened in 1989? Well, there's a few things that happened. Obviously, 1989, you have this transition between the kind of two worlds, communist, Cold World environment. And with that came the rise of these alternative centers for the art market. So the art market, I think, even though still very, very much based in cities like London, New York, Hong Kong, and to a large degree, it's still very centralized. Comparatively, it's a lot less centralized than it was pre-1989. Now you see collectors from all sorts of places, like, you know, where places like Russia, Eastern Europe, China had very, very little presence, if any presence, prior to 1989. Now you see the increasing importance of these new centers, and certainly the rise of biennials, triennials, art fairs, the proliferation of this art world infrastructure is very much related to broader sort of economic and political trends that have transpired since 1989. Also there's been some very influential exhibitions like Magiciens de la Terre at the Pompidou Museum, which suddenly made people very much aware of contemporary art coming from non-traditional centers of non-traditional global centers, so places like China, Africa, South America, and so on. So I think you both see an interest in terms of international art world players in these global areas, but also the rise of non-Western centers as important commercial actors in the art world. Okay, let's move on to, would dealers rather sell to museums and foundations over collectors? I'd say on the whole, yes. Dealers would much rather sell to MoMA than to most collectors. I mean, of course, there are exceptions, and certain dealers will very much cultivate a strong relationship with certain collectors. There are collectors that, may constitute the bulk of a dealer's income, and thus they would get preferential treatment. But still, on the whole, if you can sell an artist's work to a major museum, that obviously does very, very good things, very positive things for an artist's career. First of all, in terms of visibility, but also you can cite that to other collectors. So you could say, well, this artist has similar work in MoMA's collection, and that will help you sell work to many, many collectors. And that's much more powerful than selling to just one collector. Okay, let's look at other. How did TEFF become the world's, how did TEFF become the world's most expensive and exclusive art fair? Well, I think it has a long tradition. It has this very particular vetting process, which I discussed. The requirements are quite stringent, and I think they really pride themselves on being having very, very high standards. They're the only art fair that I'm aware of that actually vets all of the artwork that goes on show. But also, I think it has to go. Even the way that the space itself is organized, it's very lavish. They have fresh flowers everywhere, plush carpets. It's clearly presenting a very luxurious environment, and I think that has a lot to do with it as well. Okay, another question. What will the impact on the market? What will be the impact on the market of the recent increases in buyer premiums from Sotheby's and Christie's in March? Well, since this kind of duopoly exists, and one auction house does one thing, usually the other follows suit very soon after, I think it will have a minimal impact, in fact, because Christie's and Sotheby's still, in terms of the way that they're branded and their appeal to collectors, they're still above and beyond any competitor. And the fact that they both have increased their premiums at the same time, I think means that they'll anticipate a minimal impact. Okay, next question is, are you seeing an example? Sorry, every time a new question comes in, it kind of skips down. Sorry about that. Sorry. Are you seeing examples of partnerships with online businesses and art fairs, galleries? Yes, I think we've seen some. I know ArtSpace, the website artspace.com, recently. I think established a partnership with VIP Art Fair, I believe. I mean, I think you are seeing these strategic partnerships taking place, but also remember that established art businesses, including Christie's and Sotheby's, now are reliant more and more on online sales through their own websites. So there are partnerships, but then there are also kind of traditional art fair participants, actors, businesses, whatever, that are also developing their own online presence. Okay, sound issues again. Let me try and reconnect. Hello. Hi, everyone. Is this any better? Great. Okay, sorry about this. This does seem to be a pattern. Hopefully we can get this resolved before the next session. Okay, but in any event, let me scroll up and look at your questions. Okay, question. For the very tiny art market, like in Eastern European countries, what agent is essential to grow the art market, museums, auction houses, critics, or galleries? This is a really good question. I think that you see really the infrastructure is very much reliant, or a healthy art market is reliant on a number of actors participating together. So you have the kind of promotional apparatus of the commercial gallery, of the auction house, but also it's very important too to have this validation of the museum, the critic, and so on. You know, if you look at China, for instance, until very recently, China, and still to this day, you have a very, very disproportionate influence of, say, auction houses or galleries. Auction houses are still extremely powerful in mainland China, more so than dealers. And still the, you know, museum and critical apparatus is relatively underdeveloped. But I think that there has been growing confidence in the China market, in part because they've made very rapid gains in terms of validation infrastructure. So you see the very rapid growth of museums and a lot of investment in terms of, particularly in museums, but also the growth of foundations and also to some extent, to a much lesser extent, in art criticism. You know, I think the thing about developing an art market is you want to encourage collectors and buyers and participants to feel confident that the art that they are buying and acquiring is of value and is of lasting value, of permanent value. So, you know, having that museum slash foundation slash critical aspect of the market is very, very important for sustaining that. Yeah, so I think there's not really one in particular. Of course, you know, I would say some perhaps are more important than others, but really for a healthy art market, you need a kind of combination of actors and institutions. I think we had a question about the Ola Velthuis piece, and I will get you the link right now. I'm just getting on the internet, so let me link that in the message box so you can read that piece if you haven't already. It's a really interesting and I think very useful article to take a look at for understanding how art market actors kind of interact and relate very how they kind of create synergy with each other. So here I've linked to the article in the message or in the chat box. Okay, so do we have any other questions? I've been told that yes, everything will be recorded and will be available online, so you can refer back to it at your convenience. I think it should be up within the next day. Do I have a suggested reading list? Well, I think there's been a couple of readings that were on the website, so you can take a look at those. And if it's useful, I can also include recommended further reading after the next few lectures. So if that's useful for you, I can give a recommended reading list too. Okay, great. I will do that. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. So next lecture, I'll end with a list of further readings. So you can consult that after every lecture, some recommended text to take a look at. Okay, great. Well, I'm really glad that you could join me today, and I'm so sorry about some of the sound issues. Hopefully, we'll get those fully resolved in time for the next lecture. So, just final question. Any final questions? If not, I'll sign off for today. Any last minute questions? Okay, great. Well, it was great meeting you all virtually, and thank you so much for participating.